Hey everyone, it's always fun being the one thing between you and the rest of the evening. So I hope you can bear with this for the next 15 minutes. But the key thing that I want to talk about today is a shift that I see in business happening not just in a particular industry or in a particular space, but across industries. It's a shift in the way the world works. And for the long time, we've thought of this as online versus offline. We've thought of this as new economy, old economy, or we've thought of this as Silicon Valley versus the rest of the world. But the fact is that in the last 4 years, this shift has actually started pervasively entering all industries. And if I were to summarize my whole talk in a line or two, it would just be this, that from as long as we've known business, from the Industrial Revolution, especially after the Second World War, business and the world, things in the world, have always moved in straight lines. And that's what I mean by a change in the geometry of business. Things have always moved in straight lines. And over the last decade or so, things have started moving in networks. They started flowing in networks. And we obviously know that because of what we're doing. Since we're here, we're probably doing something related to the internet. But the key thing that I want to mention over there is that when things start flowing in networks, the goods that you produce and the services that you produce do not matter anymore. What matters is the interactions that you can facilitate on the network. And the reason I want to specifically mention this is because I often take issue with the term crowdsourcing, because the roots of the term lie in the term outsourcing. And the problem with that is that outsourcing is a very linear model. You're saying that instead of doing it in-house, I'm sourcing it from somewhere. The value of crowdsourcing really comes to the fore. The real part of it really comes to the fore when we're not just thinking of the crowd as an external resource from which we're sourcing things, but we're trying to create an infrastructure on which the crowd can interact with each other, and we can then deliver that value somewhere else. And that's really what I want to talk about when I talk about the shift in the geometry of business. Very briefly, I do a bunch of things. I write a blog called Platform Thinking, which has been featured on a lot of media around the world. I researched this topic specifically with a couple of scientists at the MIT Center for Digital Business. And I run a consulting company called Platform Thinking Labs, where we advise clients on navigating this shift, whether it's a startup building something to exploit this shift, or it's a large company trying to move towards this new model. So let's talk about this shift. And when I think of this shift, the older model that we've all gotten used to, and the older model that we all see all around the world, is what I think of as pipes. Because this is how business has always worked. There's been a source of value creation, and there's been a source of consumption. And whether you think of the television or radio, media has worked like that. Whether you think of manufacturing, Toyota has always worked like that. The services industry, all consulting firms, all service agencies work like this. Things move in a straight line from one source to a destination. And what happens now, because of the way the world is getting networked, is that we're moving from these pipes to new models, which I call platforms. And the word platform is extremely bastardized, if I could use a term. Everybody says that I'm going to build a platform for something, and they have no clue about what they're building. But essentially, what I mean by a platform is something that provides you an infrastructure on which people from outside, whether it's businesses, consumers, anyone from outside, can come and create value on top of it. And it provides the conditions for somebody else to come and consume that value. And the platform's role is just to facilitate this interaction. Now, the reason I start by showing the Android or the Apple platform is because when we think of the word platform, that's the first thing that comes to mind. And this shape, the fact that there is a producer side, a consumer side, and there is some value that is being created in between and being exchanged between the two sides, is something that we see repeatedly in what's happening across industries. Think of Airbnb. It's the same shape. You have producers, you have consumers, and the value is in the listings that are created over there. Because if you did not have a place to create those listings and be discovered, you would not have all these hundreds of thousands of B&Bs around the world. Think of Kickstarter. The Kickstarter doesn't do any funding. It's not a venture capital firm. It just creates the infrastructure on which these interactions happen. Think of YouTube. It's the same thing. The only thing that keeps changing is probably the overlap between the producer and the consumers is now increasing. Developers and users were two separate groups, so we found it easy to understand that. But gradually, as we moved to Twitter, we realized that we are constantly playing both roles every day. We are the producer as well as the consumer. The role of the platform is always to facilitate interactions. So if you think of any PR release by Airbnb, by Kickstarter, you'll always hear things like number of nights booked. You won't hear of things like number of places registered or number of unique users. All you'll hear of is number of nights booked, number of projects funded, total volume of projects funded, and that's because what's important is the interaction. Nothing else matters. If you've got a platform and you're not able to create interactions, you don't have a platform. You're just kidding yourself. So there are three reasons why this is happening right now. And we're very familiar with this picture, which went around the internet last year. This is actually a picture from the People's Ceremony, one from 2005, another from 2013. The point really is that the network has always been around, but we haven't always been networked. We have gotten networked in the last 3 to 4 years, or if you were to take this timeline, in the last 8 years. Interestingly, 2005 to 2013 is the time when Nokia and BlackBerry lost 95% of their market share, and this shows why. I'll get to that, to exactly explaining how that works out. So the first thing that happened is that access has suddenly become an everywhere, every time kind of a thing. The internet is no longer something you sit at a desk and do. It's something that you're a part of all the time. The second reason is really this. And what I mean by this is that the point is that value creation, I mean, we've been called couch potatoes for a particular reason, because we were never creating value. And today, everyone is creating value. Even this lady out here is creating value because she's creating interactions, which is creating data for somebody else to come and show an ad to her. She's creating value in some way. The point is that everybody today is producing. And this is a key difference, as Jeremiah also showed in his presentation this morning. The internet was always around, but the tools of production got democratized only gradually. And finally, you've probably heard of this story where Target actually predicted that a girl was pregnant before her family came to know about it, based on the things that she was buying. And this is the case of an explosion of data. Because what happens now is that these three shifts work together. When we go from linear to networked, we suddenly have a lot of people who come together and are part of this network and hence can support new business models that were never possible in the past. When we go from consumption to participation, what happens is that there are many different sources of value creation. Marriott relies on itself to create new rooms. Airbnb relies on its ecosystem to create new rooms. And this is important. The word participation is important because very often we're caught up by the word co-creation. And that has this implication that something has to be created. But when you think of participation, even a vote, a rate, a like, everything is an input into the business that was not possible before the internet. And finally, when you have all of these consumers and producers connected to each other, and you have a lot of these people creating stuff, but you have millions of users connected over there, you need to have a way of uniquely matching the right content, the right good, the right service with the right person who needs that. So the right resources need to be matched with the right needs, and that's where data comes into the picture. And there are three, and exactly these three reasons which are leading to the rise of this new business model. So if you're running a business of this sort, and if you're not catering towards creating a network, providing the tools of participation, and getting enough data about both the content or good or service and about the consumer, if you're not doing just these three things right, if you're missing even one of these three and focusing on something like page views per unique user or something of that sort, you're probably fooling yourself. So these are just the only three things that are required for a platform business to really work. So let's look at how this is happening, because industries are facing this shift. And if you see different industries, you see that the disruption repeatedly happens because the same change in shape happens in different industries. So this is an example of an industry that has been completely disrupted, right? 95% market value loss in just 8 years, never before. And that's because they were expert gatekeepers at BlackBerry, at Nokia, at a telco, deciding which apps could go to the user, taking 70% or 50% of the cut, and the iPhone and Android completely changed that. And in the process, they don't create the apps. They allow the ecosystem to create the apps. TV channels, again, deciding what goes to the user, having an expert gatekeeper, having traditional models of value creation, sources of supply, and YouTube unlocking new sources of supply. You have 13-year-olds, creating videos and becoming massive hits. And that's possible only because of the tools of production that YouTube allowed. Encyclopedia Britannica, again, it changes the way businesses work. Because in the past, you needed to have experts sitting inside a room, talking to each other and deciding what to write. And what Encyclopedia Britannica does is it provides you, what Wikipedia does is it provides you the tools to interact with each other and create the same thing that would have otherwise happened inside a room. Again, traditional funding, expert gatekeeper in between, LPs, GPs, and then startups. And all of that gets disrupted by a company that doesn't do any funding. It just connects people with money with people who need money. And finally, we never think of hotels as linear businesses, but hotels are linear businesses as well. The same shape, no matter which industry you look at, if there is disruption happening because of the internet, you can trace it back to this shape that is being changed. And if you're trying to disrupt some industry and you're playing in the same old shape, then you're getting it wrong. So the reason I've said all this is because traditionally, business has always been about creating the best good, delivering the best service quality, maximizing efficiency in how you deliver your services. Now business is changing to creating interactions. The value is in your ability to create interactions and to make interactions more repeatable over time. And what that means is that the fundamental rules that govern business completely change. So let's take an example of this very quickly. In what's happening in today's world is that the ecosystem is the new distributed warehouse. When Amazon first started its website, it was like Walmart on the internet, really. But when it opened itself up on the supply side to allow other retailers to sell through it, that's when it really became a distributed warehouse. So the ecosystem today becomes the new warehouse. And what happens in that case, again, I've taken the Airbnb example over here because hotels work in a certain way, and Airbnb uses the ecosystem to run its inventory. What happens then is you stop worrying about inventory. What you start worrying about is liquidity. What I mean by liquidity is that there should be a significant overlap between supply and demand for interactions to occur. There's no point in Airbnb having hundreds of millions of houses or rooms available in Croatia when all of the when the demand side is looking for rooms in New York. So the value really is in having a maximum overlap between the supply and the demand side. So liquidity is the new prerogative. In the past, when we had employees creating value, we needed an HR department because the human resources department created the incentives for these employees to be engaged with the business. But today, when users create the value, we need a counterpart of the human resources department. And my problem with community management is often it's seen as an extension of customer relationship management, and that's totally missing the point. Community management is actually the new human resources management. And this is not just about one guy sitting and creating new conversations. It's about everything right from the algorithms that encourage certain behavior and discourage certain other behaviors. That's what community management is about. Again, when you're creating a good or the service, you need to have quality control. But when you let it out to the ecosystem, you cannot control the quality. You do not have that iron fist anymore. You have an invisible hand. And what happens in that case is you need the ecosystem to tell you what is good, what is not good. And that is what happens to curation and reputation, through ratings, votes. All of these things come into the picture, not because they are features, not because you're building the Airbnb of X, so you need to build a vote feature like Airbnb or a rate feature like Airbnb. It's because these are the signals that allow you to decide what is good quality and what is not in the new model. And finally, the network effect is the new size does matter. Because today we are at a place where companies with less than 100 employees are reaching billion-dollar valuations. And the size of the employee base is the wrong metric to look at. The right metric to look at really is the number of users who are producing value in your ecosystem. So to sum all of this up very quickly, if you think of what a platform does, connecting producers and consumers, there are exactly three things, again, that I want to reiterate. The first thing it does is it creates a network. And for that, the first job of the platform is to pull the two roles on board, the producers and the consumers. And this is easier said than done because it's not just about marketing. You can't just throw money and get these guys in because there's a chicken and egg problem here. Without producers, the consumers don't come. Without consumers, producers don't come. Secondly, you need to create the tools and rules for these two sides to interact. You need to have the right interfaces. You need to provide them the right incentives, the right mechanisms for them to stay engaged. And finally, you need to have data about both sides for the matching to happen, for a room to be matched to a user. Now, this is, again, easier said than done because when a new platform launches, it has no data. So there's a chicken and egg problem there. And without data, forget a new platform. Even when a new user comes on board, there's no data about that particular user. The lesser the data, the more useless the platform is to the user. So there has to be a way to disrupt that. So what you need to do is if you're building a platform, you just need to do these three things: pull, facilitate, and match using data. And so just to sum this up, we often say software is eating the world, and we are very excited about it. But the point is that we are not in the business of building software. We're in the business of enabling interactions. And if we think software is the end product, we're missing the point. Thank you.